going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Back in 2017, I talked about the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comic book series. I did a few reviews, each of the first two volumes, and then the Black Dossier, and then I did 3 videos talking about each part of Volume 3, which is Century. And after that, I did not have anything else with the League series. The next thing to come after Century was a 3-part spin-off series called Nemo, featuring Captain Nemo's daughter, Janny Dakar. And I did not have that series at the time that I did those reviews, and I wasn't entirely sure if I wanted to seek those books out and get them, for 2 reasons. One, I wasn't too impressed with Century. There were some things about that storyline that I liked. I liked the 1969 story quite a bit, but the other 2 I wasn't too impressed with. But then I heard people say that the Nemo trilogy was actually superior to the Century trilogy. There's one guy in particular who has actually interviewed Alan Moore and is on a pretty friendly basis with him. He said somewhere, not to Alan Moore's face, but he said the Nemo trilogy was better. And so that gave me a little bit of hope. And I thought, okay, maybe whenever they get around to collecting all 3 of those Nemo books together, I'll go ahead and get that hardcover. Because sometime after the Century storyline wrapped up, they collected all 3 of those into one really nice hardcover edition. So if you'll recall, back in 2017, I had each of the individual pieces of this storyline, but then sometime later I got this nice, very thick-looking hardcover book that I really like. And so I thought, okay, maybe they'll do the same thing with the Nemo trilogy. Well, so far, as of middle of 2020, they haven't done that. And I eventually got tired of waiting. I don't remember whenever I got these books, but I finally went and got all 3 of the Nemo books. And so today, I want to talk to you about Nemo, Volume 1, Heart of Ice. This is by Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill. This is by Knockabout and Top Shelf, 2 separate companies. One of them is in Great Britain, one of them is in America. And this is a very short book, like 50-something pages, which is why I was wanting to see if they would eventually collect all 3 of these books into one bigger volume. And maybe they will. Maybe in a year or 2 they are going to. I don't know, because already we've had the next volume of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen has come out and has finished. So I don't know if Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill have any reason to go back and collect this in one bigger volume, because they don't strike me as the mercenary type who thought, well, if we did that, we'd make a little extra money. That doesn't seem like their modus operandi, and since they are now done with the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I have a feeling they're not going to recollect these 3 books. But anyway, this volume features Janny Dakar, like I said. We saw her, she first appeared, I guess technically, she appeared in a text piece in either Volume 1 or Volume 2 of the League, where Mina was recollecting how she recruited Captain Nemo, and we see a little girl at his island. And then we see her in the flesh in 1910, the first part of Century. And one thing that I did not care for with that volume was that the League themselves didn't feel very important in the 1910 segment. It was really a backdoor pilot for Janny Dakar. We see that she absolutely wants nothing to do with her father's legacy. She does not want to go to the Nautilus and be its new captain. She wants to form her own life, and then life kind of gets in the way, and then she decides, yes, she is going to become the new Captain Nemo. And then at the end of the 1910 book, she kind of warns the League, stay out of my way, I'm going to be very dangerous. Well, here we get to see this is set in either 1925 or 1926, and she has taken to being the new Captain Nemo pretty well. Her crew likes her a lot. They have looted and plundered lots of stuff, and she is getting bored with this life. She wants a challenge. She wants something that her father was not able to do. And we see here that she is still very much living in her father's shadow. She's haunted by his success and his legacy, and she wants to form her own legacy. And at the very beginning of the book, she steals some stuff from, it's a guy, I don't think they actually mention him in full by name, but it's Charles Foster Kane from the movie Citizen Kane, which I have not seen, but I'm well aware of Orson Welles and his career, and I'm aware roughly of the plot of Citizen Kane. But I guess I should say, with Century, one of the problems I had with it, and also a problem I had a little bit with the Black Dossier, was that you had references to these characters that Moore and O'Neill were not legally allowed to use. James Bond is not in the public domain. Harry Potter is definitely not in the public domain. So they had to be creative and clever with how they would use these characters. And in some cases, like, I think everyone knows enough about Harry Potter that if they picked up the 2009 part of Century, they could probably pretty quickly figure out, okay, this is Hogwarts, that's Harry Potter, albeit a very different version of Harry Potter. So that wasn't so much of a problem, but then you have these other characters, like the Prisoner of London. If it wasn't for me going online and looking at people annotating every single panel of these comics, then I would have no idea who the Prisoner of London is, or Jerry Cornelius, or back when I first read Volume 2, which was the Invasion from Mars, I had no idea who John Carter was. Now, we've got that movie that came out several years ago, but I read Volume 2 well before that movie came out, and it was me looking online, figuring out, oh, okay, the guy who created Tarzan created this superhuman guy who went to Mars and fought crime there and, battled Martians and stuff. And so some of this stuff where he's not legally, I say he, it's both O'Neill and Moore, they're not legally allowed to use some of these characters. It makes it difficult to understand what's going on. It makes it very impenetrable to everyone except for a very select crowd. And I pretty much have to go to Jess Nevins and his annotations that he has for this series just to figure out who these characters are and what's going on. That's not as much of a problem with this book. Since it's set in 1925, a lot of the characters here are going to be in the public domain. It's been long enough, as of the printing of this book, that they're in the clear. They can go ahead and reference these characters by name, or at least reference them heavily enough that even if they don't reference their name entirely, you can still figure out what's going on. And maybe it was just, this was my second or third reading of this book. Maybe I understood what was going on because I had read it a few times, but also I felt like I understood most of the references to this book. So anyway, getting back to the plot, Jenny, she steals some stuff from Charles Foster Kane, who has also formed an alliance with Ayesha. She is from one of the H. Rider Haggard books. I believe She is the name of it, and she was briefly mentioned in the Black Dossier. She had battled Orlando at one point in his life, and then here she has some kind of plan, and we don't really know what it is. And this is kind of similar to Century in that there's an overall plan or an overall storyline between the three books, but you're also getting a smaller done-in-one adventure with each volume. And I feel like this works a little better than Century. With Century, you get a done-in-one adventure, but then you also get some contrivances so that the overall story doesn't conclude until the last part of the story. There are some frankly, pretty silly reasons why the League is not able to succeed in their story to stop the Moonchild in 1910 and 1969, whereas here, I feel like the overall threat is masked a little bit better, and the reason that it doesn't come to conclusion, I feel like works a little bit better. So anyway, Ayesha, she has some kind of plans, and we don't really know what it is, but anyway, Charles Foster Kane, he hires a few guys to chase after Janny so that they can get the stuff back that she stole from Ayesha. And he hires Tom Swift, who is a boy adventure hero from the early 1900s, a guy named Reed and a guy named Wright. And I am not familiar with any of these characters. I've heard of Tom Swift in one of the stories. He created a laser rifle. In real life, the taser is named after Tom Swift's laser rifle. It's like Tom something, something. I don't know, but it stands for initials. But anyway, so you got these three guys who are hired by Charles Foster Kane to go and find Jenny Nemo and try and get the stuff back. And then she has decided that she is going to go to Antarctica because her father, I think shortly after she was born, he made a trek to Antarctica, and then everyone who was with him died. So she says, well, if he wasn't able to make that trip without everyone dying and he nearly went mad, I'll do it, and then I'll be better than my father. And so she takes some of her crew. We get to see Broad Arrow Jack. We get to see Ishmael, who we saw in previous stories with Captain Nemo, and then, or within the League universe, previous stories. And they go, and then Swift and his allies, they end up attacking Nemo and her crew. So then they have to make a little bit of a journey across part of Antarctica because the Nautilus has swung around to the other side of the continent, and so they're being chased by Tom Swift and his two allies. And it's basically just one really long chase sequence. In that way, it kind of reminds me of the Black Dossier. But I feel like this works a little better. The Black Dossier is like 200-something pages, and frankly, a lot of that is just Easter eggs for the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen world at large. A lot of that doesn't have any bearing on Alan and Mina running away from Emma Peel and James Bond. You get the life of Orlando, which is really cool to see, and it sets up a lot of stuff that we see later in Century. And then we also get stuff like Orlando whenever he was around in the time of Shakespeare. We get a little Fanny Hill storyline. We get lots of stuff that exists in the Black Dossier that exists in that world, but a lot of that stuff doesn't really have any bearing on what was a fairly straightforward story of these characters are running away from these characters. And this, I feel like, works a little better because it's not trying to be this big, grandiose thing. It's barely 50 pages, and so it's just a chase sequence, and I think it works as a chase sequence. And I really like the overall character arc that we get here. By the end of the story, Janny realizes that it was very foolish of her to try and overreach what her father was able to do. And she kind of laments that the old science heroes, like her father or Jean Robert or what's his name, Captain Moores, who are mentioned, and we briefly see them like in the previous, I think volume 1 of the League, there's a letter between Captain Robert and Captain Moores, and then who's the other one that she mentioned? There was someone else. We see Robert briefly in the Black Dossier. That's where it is. But she laments that those guys are dead, and her father is dead, and now the modern science hero are racist, misogynist people like Tom Swift and his two allies. And I don't have a problem with Alan Moore throwing Tom Swift under the bus. I had a little bit of an issue with Alan Moore warping Harry Potter and, to a lesser extent, warping James Bond in some of the previous stories. Harry Potter is not a psychotic antichrist who's going to kill someone with a lightning bolt from his penis. That is not what Harry Potter is. I don't care what your feelings are on the Harry Potter franchise now or 10 years ago. That is not what Harry Potter is. James Bond, yeah, he was a little misogynistic, but not as bad as he was in the Black Dossier, where he was a sociopath who was ready to rape Mina. I feel like this is a little bit better. He portrays Tom Swift as very racist, very openly racist and misogynistic. And like I said, I'm not very familiar with these stories, but everything that I've heard about them, not just from reading up on him when I was reading this story here, but from other people as well, they all agree that the Tom Swift stories are very racist and very misogynistic. So I feel like this works a little better than the portrayal of James Bond and Harry Potter. So I did not have so much of a problem with the bad guys in this being bad guys. I haven't seen Citizen Kane. What I understand of it is that Charles Foster Kane is a very greedy, ambitious kind of character, and so it would make sense that he would be forming an alliance with this immortal queen who has some kind of evil plan up her scheme. So overall, I thought this was pretty good. You've got references to possibly the movie The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. I saw it as a reference to that. I don't know if Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill are aware of that movie or if they liked it, but I saw it as a reference to that. You've got some H.P. Lovecraft here. You've got the narrative of Arthur Gordon something Pym, I think, and that's an Edgar Allan Poe story of all things. I knew that he had written some science fiction, but apparently a lot of the weird fantasy science fiction stuff in this book is a callback to Edgar Allan Poe. I didn't know that he was that science fiction-y, but there's also some other stuff I did not recognize, characters and references to stuff that I was unfamiliar with, but overall, it's Captain Nemo and her crew trying to make it through Antarctica with lots of weird science fiction and fantasy stuff there, and then these other guys chasing them, and it's, you know, a life or death situation. So that's about it for the main comic section. Like every other League of Extraordinary Gentlemen book, there is a little bit of a text piece written by Hildy Johnson, who's a character from His Girl Friday. I believe the movie was based on a play as well. I skimmed through this. I'll be honest, even in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen stories that I really liked, I was never fully on board with the text pieces. I always felt like they dragged a little bit. That's fine if you like that kind of thing, but for me, this wasn't what I came here for. I came here for a comic book story, but basically, as I looked through this story, Hildy Johnson, in 1938, I believe, she was invited to the wedding of Jenny Dakar's daughter and Captain Robert's either son or grandson. I can't remember. But anyway, basically it's just talking about the melding of these two pirate dynasties. And I believe this text story will continue in the next two volumes, kind of like how in century, you had this text story set in the 60s, even in the 1910 section and the 2009 section, the text piece was still set in the 60s. So I think this is going to continue even in the next story, which is set after 1938. The text piece will still be set in 38, if that makes sense. But anyway, I did enjoy this more than I enjoyed Century. I'm not sure, it's been a little while since I've read Volume 2 and Volume 3. In fact, I don't think I've read those more than once. I've read this one a couple times before this review, and then I read it again yesterday. But I don't think that I've read the next two stories more than one time. So it'll be interesting to see what I think of those. But I will talk about those in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, that's about all that I have to say about Heart of Ice. I hope you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to check me out as I do other videos in the future. Have a good one.